It's funny how memory works. You think it's some honest archivist, neutral, detached, keeping a clean record of what was. But no. Memory's a novelist. It dramatizes what it wants to forget, polishes what it wants to keep. And when it comes to Evan, mine should have shredded the whole manuscript. I met him long before the Empire, before the inheritance battles, before the boardrooms. Just 2 interns in a glass tower, back when I still believed merit was the currency of success. He wore ambition like cologne, impossible to ignore, impossible to trust. He smiled like he already had the job and flirted like he didn't need one. I fell for it, of course. Not loudly. Quietly. The way a smart girl falls. Like she's hedging a bet. Like she's watching herself from the outside. We weren't official. He never liked labels. He liked secrets. He liked control. And he liked that I was the other daughter, the one nobody paid attention to. Even back then he played long games. Told me once, half drunk at a networking mixer, "You're the smart one, but your sister's the one I'd marry if I were building an empire." He laughed after he said it. I did too. But something inside me closed. We drifted after that. Well, he vanished. Ghosted like a magician. No texts. No closure. Just silence. And I did what women like me do. I buried the emotion under spreadsheets and strategy decks. I got promoted. Moved departments. And promised myself I'd never be caught looking back again. Until one day, years later, I walked into my sister's engagement dinner, and there he was. Wearing the same smirk. Holding her hand. Introducing himself to my father like he'd never met the family before. If rage were a wine, I tasted every vintage that night. "Do you two know each other?" my sister asked, all brightness and innocence. Evan looked at me. Just for a second. That same flicker of recognition. That same calculating scan behind his perfect eyes. Then he smiled and said, "No. But I've heard a lot about you." And that, right there, was the moment I knew this wasn't just coincidence. This was a move. He'd studied the map. Picked the wealthier sister. Chosen the shallower end of the gene pool because it came with flashbulbs, access, and a last name that opened doors I hadn't even found the keys to yet. I should have outed him. I should have told everyone what he was. But I didn't. Because I was tired of warning people about fires they were determined to dance in. So I watched. I watched him marry into our family like a parasite sliding into the bloodstream. Watched him co-host charity galas with my sister. Watched him give laughably shallow input in meetings he had no business attending. Watched him lean into our father's ear at dinner parties with rehearsed humility. And I stayed quiet, not out of fear, but because my silence had teeth. And I was sharpening them. At work, I stayed behind the scenes. Always the analyst, never the heir. That was my sister's title, polished, public, pretty. The one with media training. The one who had the look for the front page of Forbes. But my father knew. He'd always known. One night, after a quarterly review, he called me into his office. Just me. No board. No noise. Just a glass of scotch in his hand, and a look I hadn't seen since I was a little girl getting advice about algebra and life. "He's not who he seems," he said. I didn't ask who. He didn't have to say Evan's name. It was written all over the creases of his face. "I'm making some changes," he added. Quietly. "You'll understand when the time comes." I asked him why me. "Why now?" He smiled, and there was something tired but proud in it. "Because you don't chase power like a trophy. You guard it like a vault." He never brought it up again. 2 months later, he was gone. A stroke. Sudden. Brutal. The kind of death that leaves families shattered and vultures circling. Evan cried the right way at the funeral. Held my sister like he'd lost a father. Took photos with the press like it was just a tragic passing and not the prelude to a power grab. I almost admired the performance. Almost. Then came the reading of the will. And that, dear listener, is where everything shifted. Because in that sterile, high-rise office filled with lawyers and board members pretending to grieve, my father's voice, preserved in legal ink, burned the first domino. He didn't leave the company to my sister. He didn't even divide the shares. He handed the reins, lock, stock, and boardroom to me. Total control. Immediate authority. Absolute say. There was silence so thick you could hear the ink drying on the paperwork. My sister looked like the wind had been knocked out of her. And Evan? Oh, Evan, he finally stopped smiling. I didn't gloat. Didn't speak. Didn't move. I just looked at him the way one looks at a locked door that used to open too easily. He had married my sister for a throne he thought he could slip into by osmosis. But now, I was the one wearing the crown. And I had a memory like a novelist, with a rewrite in progress. Underscore 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 underscore. They say grief reveals character. I disagree. Grief doesn't reveal anything. It strips away performance. What's left? That's who someone really is. And let me tell you, when my father's will named me as his successor, Evan didn't grieve. He recalculated. It was visible in the microseconds. The twitch of a jaw muscle. The silent glance exchanged with my sister. The barely concealed fury behind those polite, congratulatory nods from his fellow opportunists on the board. They thought he was next in line. Hell, so did he. But my father didn't build his empire on assumptions. He built it on chess moves. And Evan? He was a pawn pretending to be a king. Congratulations, Evan said to me. Voice steady, eyes anything but. I didn't smile. Just nodded and said, unexpected, I know. He hesitated. Well, it makes sense, I suppose. You've always been, quietly capable. Quietly capable. That phrase should be outlawed. It's the kind of backhanded compliment they give people like me, the ones who weren't marketed as golden heirs, who didn't come with curated press releases and glossy headshots. No, I was the one they forgot in family photos. The one who studied instead of schmoozed. The one they couldn't see because they never looked below the surface. Evan tried to recover his footing fast. The next few days were a blur of press releases and board briefings. My sister stood behind podiums, flanked by PR handlers, doing what she did best, appearing put together. Evan stood beside her like a sew-in-waiting. Except he wasn't. I was the one the shareholders had questions for now. I was the one who held the signing authority. And Evan? Evan was the accessory. But the betrayal wasn't in what he said. It was in what he didn't say. Not once did he pull my sister aside and tell her about our past. Not once did he own up to our history. Instead, he erased it, like I was a glitch in his clean little timeline. And I let him. For now. Because timing matters more than truth. My first official board meeting as acting chairwoman was a lesson in silent warfare. The boardroom was stacked with men who had already started drafting alliances, calculating influence, adjusting their language like a weather vane to whichever way power now blew. Evan showed up 15 minutes early. Just wanted to offer support, he said, leaning on the doorframe of my temporary office. We've always worked well together. I met his gaze. Measured. Neutral. I remember it differently. He laughed, low and casual. Come on, that was a long time ago. Some things age like wine. Others like poison. He tilted his head, as if amused. You sure you want to dig up all that history now? You're building something new. Let's not make this messy. It was a warning, thinly veiled. A man dangling the past like a matchbook over a forest. I replied without blinking. If you think I'm afraid of my past, you haven't read the latest script. He stepped back. Just offering help. No, I said. You're offering control. Wrapped in nostalgia. He left. And from that moment, we were no longer pretending. The betrayal wasn't just that he married my sister. It was that he used our silence. That he believed history made me vulnerable. That he thought I'd compromise a future built on merit just to preserve a memory built on lies. But let me be clear. This wasn't a love story. This was a hostile takeover. And I was done being polite. Underscore 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 underscore. The thing about men like Evan, they assume invisibility is incompetence. If you're not loud, you must be weak. If you're not grabbing power, you must not have any. If you're not in the spotlight, you must not exist. That's why he underestimated me, again. After the will was read and the shockwaves had stopped echoing, I took my seat at the head of the boardroom table like it belonged to me. Because it did. But I didn't come in swinging. I didn't tear down departments or fire anyone. I knew Evan expected chaos. So I gave him order. Polite, surgical, unnerving order. The first meeting was textbook. Financial performance review. Quarterly strategy. Merger discussions. Evan, of course, spoke too much and said too little. I think what we need, he offered, smug in his tailored gray suit, is stronger external partnerships. The late chairman had been a bit traditional. I believe the company's ready for a more aggressive, globalized stance. He glanced at me mid-sentence, gauging my reaction. I didn't blink. One of the older board members, a former CFO who'd been my father's confidant, shot me a subtle look. I met it briefly, then shifted to the spreadsheet on the screen. Interesting, I said calmly. But I notice your projections are based on the last fiscal report, not the most recent audited numbers. Evan blinked. Well, I didn't see those were released yet. They were. This morning. I sent them out before the meeting. I let the pause settle. I make it a point to work from facts, not wishful modeling. Silence. Then a few board members nodded, murmured agreement. Evan leaned back, adjusting his tie, smile thinning. It was the first time he realized I wasn't here to play house. My sister wasn't at the meeting. She rarely was. That was Evan's role, to speak for her, stand beside her, act like an extension of her inherited authority. But that dynamic doesn't work when the real authority is sitting at the head of the table and knows the company like it's her second language. Still, he kept trying. Over the next week, I noticed a new rhythm in the boardroom. Evan stopped challenging me directly. He started playing the helpful insider. You and we get this business, he said once in the hallway. Your sister's great, but let's be honest, she never really wanted this. You and we were built for it. I didn't respond, just kept walking. He followed. You know, I've always respected you. Even back then. I didn't always show it, but what? I stopped walking. Turned to him. He hesitated. But maybe I should have made different choices. I smiled. Not warmly. You did. And now we both live with them. He stared at me for a second too long. Then said, Look, I know we didn't end well. I know I screwed up. But that was personal. This is business. Let's not let the past get in the way of progress. He said it like a peace offering. But I know diplomacy, when it's used as a shield. And I know when someone's afraid to fight because they don't yet know what weapons you carry. I leaned in slightly. The past is the reason I'm in this seat, Evan. And progress? That's exactly what I'm here for. Which means outgrowing parasites. He flinched. Only slightly. But I saw it. That night, I reviewed a full 5 years of company emails, logs, and financial statements. Evan's fingerprints were everywhere: misguided investments, ghost consultancies, lobbying efforts that conveniently tied back to companies with suspicious names. I wasn't just watching him now. I was mapping his downfall. Piece by piece. Quietly. Meticulously. Because here's the thing about playing dumb in the boardroom. The dumbest person in the room is the one who doesn't know they've already lost. I didn't think much of it at the time. A simple invitation. Dinner with my father. Just the two of us. No boardroom. No business talk. No itinerary. Just dinner, 8 p.m. My place. In a text, followed by a thumbs-up emoji that somehow made it feel like he was trying not to scare me off. It was unlike him. My father was a man of structure. Conversations with him usually came with whiteboards, financial forecasts, and 3 exit strategies. But this dinner, it felt different, like something was shifting behind the scenes. I arrived early as always. The dining room was unusually quiet. No staff, no sister, no Evan. Just a half-set table and a half-poured scotch on the kitchen counter. He greeted me in that way he did when he was tired but still wanted to look sharp, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, silver hair combed too carefully. "You look serious," I said as I walked in. He grinned. "I always look serious. It's why no one ever accused me of being fun at parties." He poured me a drink and motioned to sit. We didn't start with business. We started with food. Lamb chops, roasted vegetables, and that bread he always pretended to bake himself. I waited for the segue. The reason? The pitch. It came after dessert, like an after-dinner mint laced with prophecy. "You know," he said, swirling his scotch, "everyone assumes your sister will take over." I didn't react. I'd heard this before from board whispers, tabloid speculation, even family members. He looked at me. "But she's not the one who sees in layers. You are." I frowned. "This about Evan?" He didn't blink. "Evan is a shell in a sharp suit. I know his type. I used to hire his type. He's ambitious, yes, but unoriginal. He wants power, not purpose." I stayed quiet. I needed to hear the rest. "I've been working on a new draft of the will," he said casually, like he was talking about refinancing his yacht. "Silent succession. You'll be named primary shareholder and executive successor. Full rights." The words hit me like a slow avalanche. Not shocking. Just heavy. I looked at him. "Why not tell the family?" He sipped. "Because truth announced too early is just fuel for sabotage." He stood, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled out a folder. Plain black. No name. Just a red tag. "These are some of the structural amendments I'm filing before the transfer," he said. "Read them. Understand them. But don't act yet." I opened the folder and scanned. Legal terms, inheritance clauses, non-compete shields. He wasn't just handing me the company. He was building a fortress around me before he left. I closed the file and looked up. "You trust me that much?" I asked. He didn't smile this time. He stared straight through me. "I don't trust you," he said. Pause. "I know you." That stuck with me. Not just that night, but in every decision I made after. He didn't give me the company because I was his daughter. He gave it to me because I was the only one in the room who could read a battlefield and not flinch. As I left that night, he hugged me. It wasn't long or dramatic. Just a hand on the back, firm and quiet. "I may not be around when the tide turns," he whispered. "But when it does, don't argue. Don't explain. Just lead." It was the last thing he ever said to me. Because 6 weeks later, his heart gave out before the lawyers could even finalize the paperwork. But the documents were already in motion. And so was I. They buried my father on a Friday. It was raining, of course. It always rains during cinematic endings. The kind of downpour that makes your clothes cling and your grief impossible to hide. The funeral was everything you'd expect for a man like him. Black umbrellas, long limousines, headlines about the titan of legacy industries, and a eulogy that danced around emotion with the grace of a boardroom pivot. I stood beside my sister under the same umbrella, even though we hadn't spoken since the will. She didn't look at me. Evan stood behind her, hand on her shoulder, the perfect widower-in-law. He didn't cry. Neither did I. But I saw something different in his expression that day. Possession. The way he looked at the casket wasn't grief. It was assessment, calculation. As if my father was no longer a person but an obstacle, one that had finally been cleared. The reception after was a strange theater. Shareholders hugged us. Family friends said all the things people say when they want to be remembered kindly. He was a visionary. He was tough but fair. He built something timeless. I nodded, thanked them, accepted the condolences like they were business cards. But inside, I was already reviewing the blueprint he left me. Because while everyone else was mourning the man, I was already preparing to defend his legacy. That night, I stayed behind in his study. The same room where he'd given me the folder. The same room where he'd told me to lead without explaining. I stood there for a long time, looking at the bookshelf. And I realized something. Power isn't inherited. It's assumed. It's not enough to be written into the will. You have to walk into the room like the ink was your blood. So the next morning, I did exactly that. I showed up to the headquarters at 7:58 a.m., walked through the executive floor without a word, and entered the chairman's office, my office, without knocking. The assistant at the desk looked up, startled. Ma'am, I didn't know you were." "You do now," I said. I sat at the desk, booted up the system, logged in using the credentials my father had left me. The password? Vanguard 1. Of course. The emails were already pouring in, requests for meetings, inheritance formalities, legal documentation, strategic planning sessions. I replied to none of them. Instead, I sent out one email. Just one. Informing that per the chairman's will, I will be assuming full control of the company's strategic assets effective immediately and to immediately convene for a meeting. 20 minutes later, my sister called. "I heard about the email." "Then you're informed," I said flatly. She hesitated. "You could have spoken to me first." I didn't respond, because if she still believed this was a family discussion, she hadn't been paying attention. Then came Evan. Of course he came. He showed up at my door, no appointment, all charm. "Hey," he said softly, as if we were about to have coffee and reminisce. "You're moving quickly." "I'm moving appropriately." He stepped in uninvited. "Look, I know you and your dad had a special bond. But the company, my God, the board's in shock. There's talk of transition committees, co-chair appointments. I can help smooth it all." I turned to my chair. "You think I need smoothing?" He gave a diplomatic smile. "You don't have to do this alone." I looked at him for a long time. "You've always mistaken my silence for weakness, Evan. That's your flaw. You talk too much and listen too little." He tried to laugh it off. "Come on. We were friends once." "No," I corrected him. "You were a strategy. I was an insurance policy. You just didn't realize I'd eventually cash out." He paused. "So, what? You're just going to walk in here and run everything? With no input from the rest of us?" "I'm not running the company, Evan," I said coldly. "I own it." He blinked. And in that single blink, I saw the shift. The recognition. The threat. The fear. I didn't wait for him to speak again. "Close the door on your way out. And Evan, start preparing your exit plan. Because your presence here is temporary. Mine isn't." He left. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt something that almost resembled peace. Not because I had power now, but because I finally understood what my father meant. The tide had turned. And I didn't need to explain a thing. Underscore 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 underscore. The boardroom was too cold, too polished, too male. It reeked of mahogany, stale coffee, and thinly veiled panic. The panic wasn't mine. It belonged to the people who had already imagined themselves at the top. People who assumed the hierarchy would continue untouched. That the daughter, who stayed quiet, would stay irrelevant. They were about to learn how wrong assumption could be. The estate lawyer arrived first, briefcase in hand, and the kind of rigid spine that only came from decades of managing the rich and morally flexible. "Thank you for assembling," he said, settling at the head of the long table, my table now. "As per the late chairman's final directives, this is the official reading of his revised last will and testament." Evan sat 2 seats down from me, legs crossed, arms open, wearing the relaxed look of a man who thinks his poker face is still working. My sister sat beside him, pale, tense, trying too hard to look dignified. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The lawyer began. Standard language. Debts resolved. Charitable donations. Distributions to distant relatives. Jewelry, properties, shares. And then he got to the part that stopped the oxygen in the room. To my daughter, I leave full controlling shares of the family corporation, effective immediately. She shall assume the position of chairwoman with all executive powers and voting rights. Furthermore, I hereby amend all prior succession documents to reflect her as sole heir to strategic governance. There it was. No ambiguity. No equal division. No wiggle room. Evan's jaw shifted. My sister looked like someone had slapped her with a diamond-encrusted hammer. The lawyer paused politely, but the silence was jagged. I believe, he said, adjusting his glasses, that concludes the pertinent business-related segments. He slid a separate envelope toward me. This is for you, personally. I took it, tucked it into my folder without opening it. Whatever was in there could wait. Right now, the room was watching me like I was an incoming storm system. One they thought they could outrun. I cleared my throat. Calm. Even. I'll be assembling a transition team effective tomorrow. All executive department heads will report directly to me until further notice. My office hours will be set by my assistant. Any requests for operational access will need my sign-off. Evan opened his mouth, but I beat him to it. Oh, and let's be clear, there will be no interim co-chair or advisory panel. The will is legally binding. You are welcome to contest it, but know that my father's legal team anticipated that scenario. I'd advise against it. He blinked. My sister finally found her voice. This isn't fair. I looked at her, actually looked at her. For once, she wasn't glowing under the spotlight. She was just a woman who bet on a snake and lost her throne. Fair, I said softly. You married a man who knew me first, used our family as a ladder, and stood by while he chipped away at everything our father built. And you say this isn't fair? Her lips parted, but no words came. I stood. This company is not a playground. It's not a dynasty trophy. It's not a consolation prize for the loudest voice in the room. It's a legacy, and I intend to protect it. Evan scoffed under his breath. Protect it from what? He muttered. From me? I turned to him, smile cold and exact. No, I said. From people who don't realize they're already irrelevant. And with that, I left the room. The silence behind me was the sound of tectonic plate shifting. It's strange how space changes when you control it. The walls don't move, but the tension does. The chairs don't shift, but the posture in them does. And the boardroom that once echoed with polite dismissals and condescending smirks? It went silent the moment I took my seat at the head of the table. For the first time, not as the other daughter, not as the analyst, but as the chairwoman. They didn't clap. No one ever claps when the power shift isn't in their favor. But I didn't need applause. I needed silence. And that room gave it to me in full, frosty measure. The meeting began on schedule. My schedule. I greeted each executive by name, first name, last name, project history. They were startled. Most had never heard me speak more than a few words before. Now I was leading the strategy session. And I came prepared. Slide decks, audit requests, pipeline restructuring plans, revenue timelines. Even internal departmental pulse reports I had personally compiled over the past 3 months. You see, while they were planning cocktail parties and writing succession gossip, I was documenting everything. Midway through the meeting, Evan spoke. Of course he did. He leaned forward, lacing his fingers like some consulting guru. If I may, this expansion strategy, it's impressive, he began, voice honeyed. But it might be overambitious. The board could benefit from a phased integration. I'd be happy to assist in moderating that pace. Translation: let me co-pilot this plane I didn't build. I didn't look up from my notes. You're not on the expansion committee, Evan. He smiled. Well, perhaps I should be. I looked up now. Why? Because you married proximity. He blinked, laughed nervously. The others stayed silent. I continued, flipping the page. We don't need moderation. We need leadership. And people who didn't sidestep merit by walking down an aisle. The CFO, one of the few executives who respected my father, tilted his head, amused. The HR director avoided eye contact with Evan completely. This was no longer about formality. This was dominance by performance. And Evan? He was still trying to weaponize familiarity in a space that now operated on precision. By the end of the meeting, I had established new protocols for direct reporting, suspended 2 underperforming pet projects Evan had been funneling attention to, announced a 60-day audit of all strategic accounts. No one dared object. As the boardroom emptied, a few of the senior execs lingered. "Your father would have liked this," the CFO muttered, almost surprised. I nodded. "That's why I'm doing it quietly." He didn't believe in loud transitions. But behind the calm, I was already maneuvering. I had inherited the company, yes. But I had also inherited every bad decision the previous administration had allowed to rot beneath the surface. And a significant portion of that rot traced back to Evan. He wasn't just trying to reclaim influence. He was laying the groundwork for a coup. Whispers in investor calls. Concerns about my inexperience. Suggestions to the press about a possible co-chair arrangement. And worst of all, my sister, still in mourning, still in denial, was backing him. "She's not trying to fight you," she told me over lunch that week. "He just wants to help." "You're making this personal." I smiled. "It is personal, because he made it that way years ago." "You're still angry," she said. I shook my head. "No. I'm focused. There's a difference." I paid for the lunch, walked away, and by that evening, I'd already instructed the legal team to start reviewing executive eligibility clauses in the bylaws. It wasn't just about power anymore. It was about building the wall before he figured out how to climb it. I knew he'd eventually try it. Men like Evan always keep an ace up their sleeve, and it's never a strategy. It's always sentiment. The illusion of a shared past. A few photos, a few words, a few whispered memories they saved not because they cherished them, but because they knew they might need to use them. And sure enough, it came wrapped in nostalgia. The email subject line was simple. "Do you ever think about it?" No body. No signature. Just that line. The arrogance was textbook. I stared at it for a while, then deleted it. But that was just the warm-up. Later that week, after the executive debrief, I found him waiting for me in the elevator lobby. Alone. No audience. Just 2 ghosts standing in a hallway made of steel and silence. "You've been busy," he said, trying on charm like an old suit. "Busy keeps the company running," I replied. He leaned against the wall. "You haven't changed much. Still focused. Efficient. Cold when you need to be. And you're still playing games with the mirror," I said. "Only now the reflection doesn't like you." He smiled, unbothered. "I'm just saying, we have history. That doesn't go away." I stepped closer. Not threatening, just close enough for truth to travel clearly. "We had history," I said. "You buried it. I lit it on fire." He chuckled, but there was something tight in his eyes. "You know, I kept those photos. From that trip to Mallorca." I said nothing. Still got the hotel receipts. The beach snapshots. The "how did you phrase it in that letter?" unedited version of myself I didn't know existed. Remember that. There it was. The veiled threat. The blackmail pitch dressed in wistful romance. "I remember," I said softly. "Good," he said, voice low. "Because it'd be a shame for that kind of vulnerability to resurface now. Especially with your fiancé in the picture." He miscalculated. He thought I would freeze. That shame still lived in me somewhere. That I had something to lose. But what Evan never understood, what he still doesn't understand, is that I don't run from my past. I audited. "I sent him everything last year," I said. "The letters. The photos. Even the messages you sent me before you vanished." Evan blinked. "And you know what he said?" I continued. "He thanked me. For being honest. For surviving you. For becoming stronger." I stepped closer. "Just inches now. You should have buried those photos, Evan. Not because I'd be ashamed, but because they're worthless now. Like every threat you have left." He stared at me, jaw slightly clenched. I let the silence work. Then I walked away. The next day, A memo was circulated to the internal council. Immediate assessment of all board member affiliations and prior conflicts of interest, including personal relationships tied to strategic manipulation or extortion risk. Evan's name wasn't on it, but it might as well have been watermarked across every word. Underscore 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 underscore. Corporate sabotage never starts with blood. It starts with questions. Polite ones. Whispered behind mahogany doors and poured over $40 espresso. Are you sure she's prepared for this level of control? I mean, she's competent, but executive leadership is a different animal. Did you hear she's refusing committee oversight? It's concerning. Of course she's grieving. Perhaps that's affecting her judgment? I heard them all. Not directly. Never directly. But I had ears everywhere. The first red flag came from the finance department. A request from one of Evan's old contacts for an expense reclassification, disguised as legacy executive compensation. 7 figures. Buried in jargon. I flagged it. Denied it. The next came through PR. A journalist reached out for comment on the unorthodox inheritance and rumors of strained relationships within the family. The kind of article designed to cast shadows, not reveal truth. It was subtle, elegant, professional character assassination. But they forgot something important. I was raised in these rooms. I was raised watching. So I responded not with press statements or counterleaks. I responded with audits. Internal. Quiet. Surgical. Each department was given a legacy review under the guise of efficiency optimization. No one could protest it publicly. To do so would be to suggest there was something to hide. The loyalists, mostly from my father's old guard, caught on quickly. One in particular, Harold Quinn, head of corporate governance. A man who had served through 3 mergers and once told me, over scotch at a shareholder dinner, that optics matter, but receipts rule. He approached me after one particularly cold board session. "You're handling this better than expected," he said. I looked up from my laptop. "Than you expected?" He smiled without apology. "Then everyone." Pause. "They're going to try to box you out. Not directly. Just structurally. Death by red tape. Delays. Committees. Vetting panels. Enough bureaucracy to make you look like a bottleneck." I nodded. "Good. Let them build a cage." He frowned. "Why?" "Because while they're busy building it, I'll be removing their oxygen." That same week, I restructured reporting protocols. No executive decisions made without dual sign-off. One from me, one from independent oversight. Every legacy vendor account was frozen until verified. Evan's wife, my sister, was demoted from strategic brand lead to honorary consultant. A role with no access and no votes. Cue the press leak. Chairwoman pushes out sibling amid succession turmoil. The headline landed like a stone. Evan called me that night. "You're making a mistake," he said. "The board is already nervous." "Good," I replied. "Fear means they're awake." He tried to sound diplomatic. "Look, this is getting out of hand. We were family." I almost laughed. Family doesn't extort. Family doesn't erase. And family doesn't recruit vultures. There was silence. Then, "You're going to regret cutting people out. The higher you climb, the lonelier the tower." I smiled, voice razor-thin. "Evan, I was born at the top. And I'm not lonely. I'm clearing the view." Click. I hung up first. The next morning, 2 of Evan's allies on the board submitted temporary leaves of absence. Quinn had already prepared the replacements. The knives were out. But mine? Mine were sharper. And I wasn't hiding them in silk anymore. He didn't schedule a meeting. He didn't ask permission. He just walked in like it was still 2015, like we were still 2 interns in a shared office, like I hadn't already burned the bridges he was trying to stroll across. "Close the door," he said softly. I didn't move. "I'm not staying long," he added. Still, I didn't move. But the assistant, poor thing, read the room and quietly pulled the door shut behind him. Evan approached my desk with the kind of confidence you only see in men who believe they're about to win something. He sat without asking, leaned forward, elbows on knees, practiced concern in his eyes. "You've made quite a few moves lately," he said.
"Clean. Precise.
"Impressive, really." "Thank you," I said, without looking up. "But they're not sustainable," he added. There it was.
The shift."
He waited for a reaction. Got none.
So he pressed.
"I've kept quiet, out of respect.
"For the past."
For your sister. But I have files, messages, photos. Enough to raise questions about how objective you really are in all of this." I looked up now. He held a small black flash drive between two fingers, like it was a winning lottery ticket. "From back then," he said, voice honeyed. "Emails. You telling me you loved me. That we had plans. That we talked about a future. You remember those late nights, don't you?" "I remember," I said flatly.
He leaned in.
"And imagine how the board might feel if they saw those messages. How they'd interpret your decisions." "Are you blackmailing me, Evan?" He paused. "Of course not. I'm reminding you that things were never black and white. I'm offering a truce. A shared direction. A way to smooth things for all of us." I smiled. That was his mistake. Because when I smile in silence, it means I've already won. "Do you want to know what I see, Evan?" I asked, voice low. "I see a man who walked away from something real because it didn't come in a shiny package. I see a man who married his ambition and then tried to stuff it into a family crest. And now, I see a man who's been outmaneuvered by someone he once called a backup plan." He stiffened. I continued. "Go ahead. Leak the messages. Tell the board I once cared for you. Make them uncomfortable. You know what they'll see." I leaned forward now. "They'll see a woman who learned the hard way, rose through her pain, and still didn't let it compromise her leadership." He sat back, blinking. "And you," I added. "You'll just look like a man clinging to relevance through weaponized affection." He placed the flash drive on the table. "Don't think I won't use this." "I hope you do," I said. "Because when you do, you'll open the door for me to expose everything. The offshore accounts. The illegal lobbying. The shell corporations in your brother-in-law's name. The side deals. The misappropriations. And that little consulting firm you funneled money through 3 months ago. I have the receipts."
His face changed.
No charm now. No smile. Just stillness. "You don't win, Evan," I said. "Not here. Not anymore." He stood slowly. "You're cold." I stood too.
"No."
"I'm calculated. You taught me the difference." He left. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't look back. And I didn't watch him go. Instead, I picked up the flash drive, opened my drawer, and dropped it in next to the folder my father once gave me. That night, I sent a directive to legal. Draft an executive bylaw barring any board member with prior romantic entanglements with other voting members from eligibility for advisory roles, interim appointments, or executive access. Effective retroactively.
Signed.
Dated.
Filed.
I wasn't just cleaning house anymore. I was purifying the air. Underscore 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 underscore. Desperation doesn't wear rags. It wears tailored Italian wool, custom-fitted and cologne-soaked. It flashes a Rolex. It smiles, too wide in photos. It gives interviews with just enough charm to make a lie sound like a misunderstanding. Evan was desperate, and he wore it like a runway piece. The campaign started a week after our last encounter. First came the anonymous tip to a business gossip blog. Insiders claim new chairwoman emotionally unstable. Personal bias driving corporate decisions. Then a whisper to one of the more legacy shareholders. She's running the company like a vendetta, not a vision. And then, of course, the leaked message thread. A handful of selectively cropped emails, lines pulled from context, made to look like I'd offered him insider updates. Old flames conspiring in secret. The headline practically wrote itself. My fiancé forwarded it to me with a simple note. Should we frame it or burn it? I smiled, closed the article, and kept moving. Because what Evan never understood, what he still couldn't grasp, was that public perception doesn't beat private control. He was throwing fire into the wind. I was controlling the oxygen. I didn't issue a press release. I didn't hold a crisis meeting. Instead, I did two things. First, I quietly initiated a full digital forensic audit, not of the company, but of Evan's personal communications. The ones that lived in servers he forgot my father had full data access to. He'd used company tech for years. His arrogance made him sloppy. Second, I contacted a handful of quiet power brokers, stakeholders who mattered more than press headlines. Not the loudmouths. The quiet shareholders. The ones with old money, long memory, and no appetite for mess. We had a meeting. No press. No recordings. Just numbers. I laid it all out. Revenue growth since the transition. Staff retention increases. Audit cleanups. New foreign interest in our clean energy subsidiary. One of them, a woman named Helen Sinclair, 68, as sharp as a diamond and twice as unbreakable, leaned in and said, "We don't care who you slept with, dear. We care about dividends." I nodded. Then you'll be happy with Q3. And they were. The noise didn't stop. Evan went on record the next day, appearing in a primetime financial podcast, dressed like a man who still thought he had options. "I just want what's best for the company," he said, voice syrupy with fake humility. "I've known the family for years. This isn't about me. It's about leadership that listens." He forgot one thing. Leadership doesn't listen to echoes. It listens to truth. That same night, the digital audit team returned with results. Emails from Evan to a former vendor, attempting to reroute marketing funds through a third-party shell company. A chain revealing pressure on junior employees to adjust branding performance metrics. And best of all, financial transactions linking his personal consulting firm to a PR company responsible for pushing negative coverage about me. I scheduled a meeting. Internal only. Legal. Governance. Ethics committee. HR. No preamble. Just a 15-slide presentation titled, "An Examination of Coordinated Internal Disinformation and Malfeasance, the Evan Files." Silence. Followed by anger. Followed by consensus. I didn't need to scream. I had proof. And proof always wins in the long game. Underscore 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 underscore. The conference room was packed. No catered lunch. No branded folders. No small talk. Just tension. The kind that sits in the corners and watches you breathe. Every board member had been summoned with less than 24 hours' notice. No agenda listed. No attachment sent. Just one line in bold across every calendar invite. Urgent governance session. Attendance mandatory. At exactly 10 a.m., I walked in. Not late. Not early. Exactly on time. I carried nothing but a slim black folder and a copy of the company charter, freshly printed, revised, and bound. Evan was there. Of course he was. He wore a navy suit and a mask of calm. That smile he always used when he thought the trap belonged to someone else. It would be the last time he wore it in this building. "Thank you all for coming," I said. "We won't be here long." I handed a copy of the revised charter to the corporate secretary and passed another to our legal counsel. "I'm proposing an amendment to the corporate bylaws. 2, to be exact." A murmur rippled around the table. I raised a hand. "These amendments are not symbolic. They are structural." I let the silence stretch before reading aloud. Amendment 14C. No individual with familial ties to a current board member, by marriage, blood, or domestic partnership, may serve in an executive capacity, nor participate in any advisory, strategic, or fiduciary decision-making role within the company. I paused. Let it land. Then I turned to the next page. Amendment 14D. Any shareholder, vendor, or employee found to have engaged in deliberate disinformation campaigns, coercive romantic entanglements with company decision-makers for strategic access, or financial misrepresentation will be permanently banned from all company operations, contracts, and subsidiaries, effective retroactively. There was no noise now, just stillness. I looked around the room, meeting each gaze without blinking. These changes are not emotional. They are operational. We cannot allow legacy influence to infect future integrity. Evan spoke. His voice was softer than usual, calculated. This feels personal. I turned toward him. You made it personal when you weaponized memory. When you used proximity to power as a way to climb through shadows. When you tried to rewrite history with blackmail and press. He leaned forward. If you do this, you set a dangerous precedent. No, I said. You did. I'm just making sure it never happens again. Then I handed the floor to legal. The counsel, neutral, exacting, laid out the implications. Explained the audit findings. Reviewed the digital proof. The shell companies. The payments. The manipulation. When they finished, I asked one question. Is there any objection to these amendments being voted upon and adopted today? No one spoke. Not even Evan. And, when the votes were cast, unanimous. 14-0. Evan didn't get a vote. Not anymore. I signed the amendment packet with my father's old Montblanc pen. And just like that, it was done. Evan sat there, stunned. Not yelling. Not pleading. Just stunned. He finally whispered, "You've ruined me." I stood.
No, Evan.
You ruined your shot. I just made sure you don't ruin anything else. Security was already briefed. He wasn't dragged out. That would have been dramatic. No, he was escorted.
Professionally. Quietly. Permanently.
As he passed me, he didn't look back. But I didn't need eye contact. I had his name already being deleted from every file system in the building. Underscore 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 underscore. She didn't text. She didn't email. She showed up at my door. No press. No entourage. Just her. The same sister who used to braid my hair while humming off-key. The same one who used to steal my sweaters and lie about it. The same one who stood beside Evan while I was burned in silence. Her eyes were red, rimmed with exhaustion and mascara. She hadn't slept. Or eaten. Or maybe both. "Can we talk?" she asked, voice barely holding shape. I stepped aside. Said nothing. She walked in slowly, like she didn't know whether to sit or scream. Finally, she settled into the chair across from me, the one where my fiancé usually read investor memos and bad poetry. "I just need to understand," she said, "why you did it." I didn't answer. Because we both knew the real question wasn't about the bylaws. It was about the betrayal. Hers.
Mine.
Our father's. "You destroyed him," she whispered. "Evan?" I asked. "Or our father's vision?" Her voice rose. "You didn't have to go that far. The band, the public removal, the internal memo. You humiliated him." "No," I replied.
He did that to himself.
I just refused to cover it up. Her jaw clenched. "You never forgave me, did you?" I looked at her, really looked. She wasn't the polished heiress now. No makeup tricks. No rehearsed lines. Just a woman who thought love was enough to secure her place. And maybe, once it would have been. "I forgave you the moment you told me you were engaged to him," I said quietly. I smiled. "I hugged you. I toasted the ring." She nodded. But you didn't mean it. No, I admitted. I meant it for you, not for him. She swallowed. Then why didn't you stop it? I leaned forward. Because I spent my whole life being the one who saw things early, who warned, who watched, who waited. And when no one listens long enough, you stop speaking. She blinked, tears welling. He said you were jealous. I raised a brow. Did you believe him? She didn't answer. Because if you did, I continued, then you never knew me. And if you didn't, but still stood by him, then I never knew you. The silence cracked between us like old porcelain. I loved him, she said. He chose me. I nodded. He used you. There's a difference.
She broke then.
Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a quiet, collapsing sob, shoulders shaking, mouth covered, dignity unraveling in real time. And I felt nothing. Not glee. Not revenge. Just the emptiness of a cost counted too many times. You didn't just take the company, she said between breaths. You took my life. My husband. My name. I stood slowly. No, I said. You handed it to him. I just took it back. She looked up, eyes bloodshot. What now?
Now.
I walked to the door. Now you figure out who you are without someone else's name stitched to your purpose. She stood, swaying slightly. You think I'm weak. I think you're wounded, I said. But weakness is when you let the wound fester into loyalty. She stepped out.
Paused.
Turned one last time. You changed. I shook my head.
No.
I just stopped hiding. And I closed the door behind her. Not with anger. With finality. There's a certain kind of smile that scares powerful men. It's not seductive. It's not warm. It's the kind of smile that says, I know exactly what I'm doing, and you have no idea how far behind you are. That's the smile I wore the night of the gala. Black silk dress. Hair swept back. Pearl earrings from my father's safe, his final unspoken nod to legitimacy. No flashy security. No PR handler glued to my side. Just me, entering the marble atrium like I'd always belonged there, because I did. It was the company's annual Vision Gala, an event usually hijacked by whoever had the most buzz or wore the sharpest tux. This year, that buzz had a name.
Mine.
And the room felt it. Investors. Executives. Foreign partners. Former skeptics. All of them watching as I crossed the floor, offering nods instead of bows, answering handshakes with perfectly timed pauses. The speech was brief. Growth is a matter of vision. But legacy is a matter of integrity. We honor both. Starting now. The applause was real. Not thunderous. Not desperate. Just final. The people who doubted me had adjusted their opinions to match the trajectory of my power. That's how this world works. Half the room had sided with Evan 2 months ago. Now, they couldn't remember why. And then, in true poetic irony, I unveiled the new global partnership, a clean energy collaboration with a European tech firm Evan had tried and failed to court last year. I'd secured the deal in secret. Finalized it the morning after his expulsion. The CEO, a woman named Sophia with a sharper mind than her PR team, lets on, toasted with me on stage. I heard your company's undergone a regime change, she whispered, smiling for the cameras. Not a change, I replied. A correction. The crowd ate it up. Later that night, I stood on the balcony above the gala, watching the glittering crowd swirl like constellations at my feet. Quinn approached, my father's old consigliere. He held a flute of champagne but didn't sip. You've turned this place into something it's never been, he said. A company with a conscience? I asked. A company with a spine, he corrected. He left the glass on the ledge and walked away, leaving me alone with the skyline. I stayed there for a while, long enough to see Evan's name scrubbed from every program, banner, and guest list. Long enough to watch my sister's name listed as former executive liaison. Long enough to realize that I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was branding. And my brand was simple. Poise with a scalpel. They could whisper what they wanted behind closed doors. But publicly, I was now untouchable. Because the assassin who smiles is the one who doesn't have to draw blood anymore. Underscore 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 underscore. The thing about empires? They don't collapse with fire. They collapse with paperwork. While Evan was busy spinning false narratives, I was quietly dismantling every economic tether he thought he had left. It started with a simple memo to our forensic compliance team. Conduct a deep review of all consultancy, vendor, and advisory contracts signed between Q1 2020 and Q3 2023. Prioritize anything with secondary routing or offsite accounting. 3 days later, I had what I needed. He'd built a financial maze. Shell companies, routing services, foreign accounts listed under aliases connected to his cousin's pet project in Prague. Clever?
Yes.
Survivable? Not anymore. I called a closed-door emergency session with legal, finance, and strategic integrity oversight. It lasted 90 minutes. By the end of it, we'd triggered legal asset freezes on all flagged entities, seized back nearly $17.2 million in unauthorized contractual gains, terminated 4 vendor partnerships Evan had secretly negotiated kickbacks from, sent the entire findings packet to our federal compliance liaison for external audit review. He wasn't just removed now. He was being erased.
Strategically, publicly,
legally. A few days later, his accounts were flagged for review by the bank he used to brag about over dinner. His consulting firm website went offline. Quietly, almost sheepishly. His wife, my sister, was served a separation of assets notice. And me? I stood on the 40th floor, looking over a report labeled Financial Exile, Status, Executed. I didn't smile, not because I felt guilt, but because I felt closure. What Evan failed to understand was that reputation could be salvaged. But trust, once burned, leaves no survivors. That day, I received a text from an unknown number. It was short. 2 words. You won. I stared at it for a moment.
Typed back. No.
I just collected. I never heard from him again. Because there's no coming back from financial exile. Not in this world. Not in mine. Underscore 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 underscore. Scandal doesn't break like thunder. It seeps. One article at a time. One leak at a time. One push from the right source, at the right time, with the right name, and the dam bursts. It started with an expose in Capital Current, a respected financial publication known for sniffing out rot before it stinks. Corporate Parasite, The Rise and Ruin of Evan Calden. Tagline: From whispered boardroom deals to falsified vendor contracts, Evan Calden's fall from grace is a masterclass in polished deception. It was brutal. Citations, screenshots, financial records, quotes from anonymous executives, some of whom I could name by voice. They painted a portrait that was clinical and cold, and accurate. He was described as a shadow operator whose ambition outran his ethics. A man who married into a fortune and treated governance like a game. An archetype of charm turned corruption. Even the headline image was a calculated choice. Him stepping out of a car, looking away from the camera, tie askew, mid-blink. The visual equivalent of caught. Social media turned savage. Typical corporate leech. Imagine marrying into power just to get yourself banned from the building. She really cleaned house. Respect. Dude fumbled generational wealth and reputation in 1 quarter. Then came the TV panelists, the business podcasts, the YouTube commentary channels dissecting every twist like it was an episode of prestige drama. And through it all, I said nothing. Silence now was not strategy. It was sovereignty. But my sister? She wasn't built for silence. She issued a statement. I was unaware of my husband's financial misconduct. I was not involved in any decisions connected to his consulting work. Our family is hurting, and I ask for privacy during this time. Translation: please separate me from the blast radius. But public opinion is rarely merciful. She became collateral. Some felt pity. Others called her complicit. Some called her a victim. Others called her a mirror. She messaged me late one night. Are you happy now? I didn't reply. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. Because this wasn't about happiness. This was about honesty finally having a louder voice than manipulation. 1 week later, I attended a press dinner for the new joint venture deal. Someone asked off the record, "Do you have anything to say about the Evans scandal?" I raised my glass. I have a company to run. And I left it at that. Let the world dissect the rest. I had no more knives to throw. Only an empire to expand. It didn't feel like a victory.
Not really.
When the dust settled, after the votes, the expulsions, the headlines, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. Not because I regretted what I did. I didn't. But because there's something about reclaiming what's rightfully yours after it's been nearly destroyed that doesn't feel like glory. It feels like repair. And repairs? They're quiet, lonely, deliberate. The company my father built felt like a shell of itself when I took full control. It still breathed, but it breathed like someone waking from a long, troubled coma. Too many decisions made by ego. Too many hands steering from the shadows. Too many people in power who had forgotten what this business was supposed to be about. And so I began to rebuild. Not from ambition, but from memory. I thought about my father. About the way he used to linger at the manufacturing floor just to shake hands with someone whose name no one else bothered to learn. I thought about how he'd scribble notes at the kitchen table, muttering to himself while my sister and I did homework nearby. I thought about how he'd say, "A company is only as noble as the people it uplifts when no one's watching." So I stopped looking at stock charts. And I started looking at people. I reinstated a mentorship program my father once championed before the board streamlined it out of existence. Paired young staffers with execs who remembered the company's roots, not the ones with the loudest resumes, but the ones who carried a little reverence in their eyes. I sent quiet memos to every department head. Forget your numbers for a week. Ask your team how they're doing instead. Some rolled their eyes. Others wept in their offices. Humanity was flooding back into the veins of the business, and it was long overdue. Still, not everything was healing. My sister and I hadn't spoken since the day she left my doorstep in tears. She hadn't reached out. And I hadn't either, not because I was angry, but because I didn't know how to reach for someone who still believed I'd taken everything from her. But her office still sat untouched. I hadn't reassigned it, hadn't stripped her name from the door. I couldn't bring myself to. Maybe I was still hoping. Maybe I was still grieving. Maybe both. One night, I stayed late, much later than usual. The building was nearly empty. I walked through the corridors and found myself at the legacy wall. My father's portrait hung proudly there, surrounded by the men who came before him. My face wasn't there, and I wasn't sure it ever should be. Because legacy isn't a photograph or a title. It's what people say when your back is turned. What stays behind when the press stops asking questions. I touched the frame of his picture. "You wouldn't recognize the place right now," I whispered. "But I think maybe you'd be proud." I stood there a while longer.
Not as chairwoman.
Not as Victor. Just as a daughter trying to stitch the pieces of something sacred back together, with steady hands and a heart that still hurt in ways she didn't know how to name. Underscore 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 underscore. There are moments in life that don't feel like choices. They feel like necessities. Final acts we perform not because we want to, but because we've reached the end of what grace can carry. This was one of those moments. The board meeting was short, tidy,
Civil.
but I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. I watched as the last item on the agenda lit up the screen. Final motion. Permanent ban Evan Calden. The language was direct. No access to any subsidiary, investment partner, or vendor. No advisory or executive involvement now or ever. No name in any hall, any document, any memory the company chooses to preserve. A complete blackout. One of the younger board members asked, "Do we need to be this final?" Quinn, my father's old friend, glanced at me, waiting. I didn't speak immediately, because the truth was, I didn't want to be this final. Part of me still remembered who Evan had once been, charming, wide-eyed, ambitious in a way that felt contagious. I remembered the college nights, the quiet dreams whispered between deadlines. I remembered believing in him, but I also remembered what followed. The manipulation, the erasure, the way he'd stepped over every boundary and then called it progress. And most of all, I remembered how it felt to sit across from my sister, watching her crumble under the weight of someone she thought would protect her, while knowing I'd once thought the same. So I finally answered. He had every chance, every exit ramp, every moment to choose integrity. Instead, he chose strategy. He chose himself. Again and again. I paused, looked at every face around the table. This isn't just about policy. It's about making sure no one else is ever made small for someone else's convenience. We owe our people that. The vote passed. Unanimously. I signed the order with my father's Montblanc, the one he left for me in a velvet box marked only with my initials. My hand trembled a little, not because I doubted myself, but because endings, no matter how earned, still leave echoes. After the room emptied, I sat there alone, quiet,
Still.
I thought about what Evan might be doing right now, whether he'd already heard, whether he'd laugh, or rage, or break something, or whether he'd finally realized that this time, no call was coming. No seat was being saved. No door was being left unlocked. He was gone. Not just fired. Not just disgraced.
Erased.
And not by revenge. By consequence. I took the signed motion and placed it in the locked archive. And as the vault door closed behind it, I whispered something I hadn't said in years. Goodbye. And this time I meant it. Underscore 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 underscore. I didn't expect her to come. The last time my mother and I were in the same room, it was the funeral, stiff hugs, tighter smiles, all of it draped in black and unspoken blame. But now here she was, standing in my office doorway, older than I remembered, smaller, somehow. She didn't speak right away, just looked around, at the framed photo of my father on the shelf, at the unopened envelopes on my desk, at me, still in the chair he once sat in. "I always thought this room would be hers," she said quietly. I nodded. So did she. She looked at me. "And you?" I thought I'd be the one fixing things from behind the curtain while they took credit. She let out a breath, half a laugh, half a sigh. "You were always the quiet one," she said. "The one we didn't worry about." Funny how that always sounds like a compliment until you realize it's why no one protected you. There was a long silence. Then she stepped in, sat down across from me like we weren't mother and daughter, but two estranged diplomats on neutral ground. "I was wrong about you," she said. "About what you could handle." "No," I said. "You just believed what everyone else wanted you to." She didn't deny it. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not just for not seeing you, but for not listening when you spoke." I looked at her then, really looked, at the woman who raised me to smile politely,
To defer.
to stay useful but never loud, who had celebrated every one of my sister's wins like she'd won the crown and met mine with, "Well done, sweetheart," Next time, say something about it. And still she was here. Still trying. Still human.
Thank you, I said.
For saying that. She looked relieved. Until I added. But I don't need it to keep moving. Her expression cracked just a little. I know, she whispered. And that's what hurts the most. She stood. Walked toward the door.
Paused.
You turned it all into something better. I just wish it hadn't cost so much. I didn't answer. Because I did too. She left. And a few hours later, I made one more visit. Not to the boardroom. Not to my office. But to my sister's old apartment. I knocked. Waited. She opened the door just far enough to see it was me.
She didn't speak. So I did.
You don't have to forgive me. I'm not asking for that. She stared. But I want you to know you were never the enemy. Not once. Tears welled in her eyes. You were just collateral, I said softly. And that's what I'll never forgive myself for. She didn't slam the door.
She didn't invite me in.
She just stood there, holding the threshold like it might break in her hands. And then, slowly, so slowly, I saw her nod. Not agreement. Not surrender. But something in between. I turned and walked away. Not lighter, but clearer. Family can't always be rebuilt. But sometimes it can be rewritten. And this was my new chapter. Underscore 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 underscore. The room was silent. Not with tension. Not with grief. Just stillness. It was late, the kind of late where most of the city was asleep and the building had emptied hours ago. But I stayed. I stayed because tonight there was one final document to sign. Nothing explosive. No headlines. Just a deal. A clean energy merger my father would have championed in a heartbeat. Visionary. Humane. Profitable. Yes, but built on something real. A partnership that gave back as much as it earned. I sat at my desk and pulled out the file. Before signing, I reached for the drawer on my right, the one I rarely opened. Inside was a black velvet box. And inside that, the Mont Blanc pen. His pen. Still heavy. Still smooth in the hand. Still carrying the weight of a man who'd built something from nothing and left it in hands he trusted, even when the world didn't. I clicked it open, poised over the signature line. But I didn't sign yet. I looked up at the shelf beside me. At the photo of the two of us, me in braces, him in one of those awful pattern ties he loved. We'd taken it after my high school debate finals. I'd lost. He told me it was still one of the best performances he'd ever seen. Because I hadn't backed down. Even then, I think he saw this moment coming. Long before I did. And maybe that's why he left the company to me. Not because I was perfect. Not because I was the obvious choice, but because he knew I'd protect it, even from our own family, especially from our own family. I signed my name, deliberate, steady. The ink bled across the paper with finality. That was it, the last move, not a takedown, not a power play, just a promise fulfilled. I put the pen down and exhaled. A long, slow breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months. Maybe years. The empire was no longer a battlefield. It was mine. But not because I fought for it. Because I rebuilt it. Brick by brick. Memory by memory. Scar by scar. And I did it as his daughter. Not the forgotten one. Not the quiet one. Not the backup. Just me. I closed the file, turned off the lights, and left the office with the pen still in my hand. Not because I needed it anymore. But because it had already written every ending I would never apologize for. underscore 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 underscore